We discussed the great importance of listening, why it's so rare and difficult. Why is listening so hard to do?
If listening gets longer, we inevitably lose concentration after a while.
That's right. Concentration drops considerably. There's no problem with short sessions.
When I listen to a topic that I'm not interested in or unfamiliar with, my mind starts wandering.
You think, I'm busy and I don't have time to listen to this. That's right. And above all, we are always busy. If we can afford it, I wouldn't mind listening to stories I'm not interested in. Also, if I had free time, the time will increase to concentrate on them. But we're always busy. So you need to feel freedom in your heart to listen, and you need to make a decision to make some time for that person. The first reason is our busyness, and the second reason is that it requires courage to do so. Do you know what managers hate hearing the most? Manager, I have something to tell you. When team members go to their leaders to tell them something, they don't say, Manager, I have to tell you that I'm so grateful to you. They usually don't, right? Instead, the manager starts worrying. Is this employee going to tell me he's having a hard time? Is she going to resign from the company? It takes courage to be able to listen carefully to those words, right? For example, if someone says they need to tell me something important, you must have courage and determination to be able to focus on it, right? I think listening is so hard because we all are people who cannot be free of these aspects. Nevertheless, I think that today is a great opportunity for us to participate together, empathizing and responding appropriately when listening to others in these situations. I hope you'll be able to think, yes, I did that too, or shouldn't do that either, after listening to these examples. For us to empathize and react appropriately, we first need something extremely important. We are 3 people directly engaging in conversation, right? You must concentrate on the person you're talking to and the subject at hand. It's so obvious, right? But it's much harder than you'd think. When I had been working at a company for about a year, it was such a struggle for me. My manager was also a very hard person to deal with. Though he's a great man, it was so hard to work with him. So one night, I opened up to my coworkers when we went out for dinner. They'd know best, right? That's why I complained about my manager to my colleagues, telling them that it was too hard to work with him. But my friend sitting beside me said, Your manager is a gentleman compared to mine, and started complaining about her own manager. However, even before she was done with her story, another coworker who was sitting beside her said, All of you be quiet. Wait till I tell you about my manager. I felt that my words had disappeared into thin air, and I felt empty inside. My story had flown out the window, and I wondered if anyone had heard it at all. Though we were gathered together, each of us was focused on telling our own stories. In the end, we concentrated on ourselves instead of others. First of all, I think it would be great to focus on the person you are talking to without deviating from the subject or leaving their story for another time. You don't need to say, but my manager is nice. Just say, that sounds rough, or sounds like a rough year. This makes them realize that you've been really listening to them. However, we often make mistakes too. The second method to have people empathize and respond well is to ask good questions. Do you feel comfortable or a little uncomfortable when someone keeps asking you questions? How do you feel?
I'm the type that asks a lot of questions.
You do?
Yes. When I ask questions, for example, when there are problems, I think I tend to ask a lot of questions to help find solution together.
Even if the other person can't answer right away, a question makes them think about it for a while. I think questions that make someone re-examine things in a different way are really good ones. Are you the type of person who asks a lot of questions?
If there's something I'm not familiar with while working, I usually ask questions about it.
And do others respond well to that?
Yes, they answer me in detail.
Ah. How great would it be if the explanation was so detailed in the first place that you don't even need to ask questions, right? But just as we all can't be concise about everything we want to say, we should acknowledge that others can't either. That's why you must ask questions in important situations when you're not sure, and sometimes people don't know themselves when they're saying. When that happens, just asking questions such as, "What do you think?" or "How are you feeling?" can be a very useful listening skill. We talked about what kind of questions will we ask at last year's retreat seminar. There are two major directions you can take with asking questions. The first is asking judges questions. Who's wrong? What is wrong? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with him? How do I prove that I'm right? Why are they so foolish? These are questions that are asked with the mindset of a judge. Why can't you remember that? Is an example of such a question. Will you tend toward asking those kinds of questions, or will you tend to ask questions from the other side? From yourself to someone else. Let's call them learner's questions. Learner's questions are like this. How can I help this person? When we hear some concerns, so let's say, for example, that a senior coworker says something like, "Hey, you were like that last time, but it turns out you're always like this." Once my senior coworker asked me, "What was the reason you did that?" And "How can I help you?" These kinds of questions can be considered learner's questions. And here's the thing. A learner's question can also be, "What do you really want to say to me?" What is the positive aspect of this? As I prepared these things, I thought about the positive aspects about this line of questioning. As you ponder and worry about what to say to the other person, you're also learning. This is such a positive aspect of it. So it is very good to ask questions like this, and to know what the positives as well as the difficulties and negatives the other person has been through, and what you can learn from this interaction. I think it's a great way to respond, empathize, and ask good questions. Now, although we have discussed the topic of what's good if you do it in a certain way, let me show you examples of reactions we should not do. There are more than expected. Looking at myself, I think I also make too many. These are not good reactions. I'll give you lots of examples like this. So it's good to look at ourselves and see if any of us, including myself, are making these mistakes.
I'm guilty too.
Now, first, you're already guilty? Someone tells you something, but then you one-up them. You start talking about something even bigger. There was a case I told you about earlier, right? My manager sucks. Don't even start. Mine is worse. Things like that, right? How's that? Do you sometimes make this mistake?
This can happen in normal conversation, even if it's not about manager.
Actually, our manager is such a good person.
I think I tend to do this one-upping because I'm trying to empathize with the other person from their perspective.
And it could be that your intentions aren't necessarily bad. I have this problem as much as you, so I tend to say, "That's really not such a big deal." So we could be saying this with good intentions. So we have to be careful about not shifting the focus on yourself to make yourself feel good. This is a part that we should be a bit more cautious about. The second most frequently made mistake. We do this a lot. It's similar to what we talked about earlier. Let's say you're trying to offer a little solution or say something like, "Hey, you shouldn't do it that way." I think that giving advice like this is one of the mistakes we make most often. What comes to your mind first when your wife says something like this?
The problem and the resolution?
the problem, and resolution. So, do you also say the resolutions that come to your mind?
I think the way to solve problems is by asking a lot about whether they've thought about the solutions.
Ah. And first, before we give that kind of advice, what should we do first?
Empathize.
That's right. Let's take a closer look at what that person's emotions are. Then, even if you give them advice afterward, it's not a big problem. I think it'd be good to think that the world doesn't come to the end, and we won't run out of times as a result. And in some respect, you may be giving advice when the other person didn't even ask for it. If someone says, I'm having a hard time with this and that person may be wanting to hear, I see. Instead, we may start wondering what kind of advice we should give. We could develop some anxiety about this. The third is a bit similar. You know, when you say something like, I know this because I've already tried it. You don't know, but I do because I've already done it. It's teaching. I think that we make the mistake of continuously trying to teach someone. You don't know this, but I do. You don't know this, but I know this much. Because you're talking on the premise that what your ideas are more correct, the other person doesn't want to talk to you if you come out this way. And another frequently made mistake, you all probably have this kind of experience. While you're all worked up while talking, and the other person says, hearing that just reminded me of something. And in many cases, the conversation changes completely. It's like when you're trying to talk about your struggles, but you get cut off. If someone says, hey, just forget about it. Let's stop talking and grab a bite to eat. You may have wanted to talk, but thought, I guess this isn't the time, and just stop yourself. So we have to be extremely careful regarding these parts. I think we make a lot of these mistakes if we don't consciously try not to make them. Finally, is a mistake we make very frequently. It's projecting. It's assuming that your problems are similar to everyone else's in the world. For example, let's say someone's story seems so much like your own. It's so similar to the problems you're having. You react by saying, that seems so much like me. But the moment that you say that, the subject is not focused on the other person. It's focused on you. Listening is so difficult, right? No matter how well we listened, if we don't practice how to react, we can make mistakes toward the other person. Please remember that. Now, we're going to talk about something good, which makes us feel great when we hear it. If you hear this, you'll be able to listen well, but there's something that you don't want to hear. Based on the 360 degrees feedback, though you may appreciate it when someone writes in very detail what they want you to improve, you don't feel great when you hear it. It's not pleasant to hear. How can we react to things that we don't want to hear? This is something I mentioned at the last session as well. Whenever we hear words that we don't really want to hear, words that are difficult to swallow, or negative feedback, we feel internal irritation. It could cause irritation because the words are so true, so you can get irritated by the truth. And you may have considered this person truly valuable and that you put in an incredible amount of effort, so you could actually feel even worse, hearing something like this from him or her. You should recognize that these various irritations that you feel is not due to the other person's mistakes. By first looking within and listening to what's inside, you can realize that it's due to the thoughts that you usually have. And I think it's necessary to objectively understand that this is why you get hurt in certain ways, and try to figure out what you need to improve first. Now, everyone, when you were born, though you may not remember, we're not born by saying, Mom, I'm born, right? But also, when we die, the last surviving ability we have when we die is listening. One time, someone close to me was about to die, and the doctor told me that they were still able to hear. The doctor told me to tell this person a lot of good parting words. So the first thing we do when we're born and the final thing we do when we die is not speaking, but ultimately listening. This is an extremely important part for us, and if we have to listen anyway, I think it's a great thing to really listen to someone. I want to say this, that feedback is love. There was something I told you, right? And above all, listening is about this. Every human being is so precious in themselves. Listening is about laying aside the sharpness in your words and any prejudices you may have. You should resist your desire to turn the subject around to focus on the other person and see what the other person's desire is. I'd like to say that listening is serving. There are people who say that just having someone listen to their story makes them feel like their soul is being healed. I hope that you'll remember what we discussed today and become someone who can heal others by listening to them. And with that, shall we wrap up our seminar? Thank you, everyone. Thank you.